Therapists of Reddit, has a patient ever shared something that was either too much or caused you to question your own life? If so, what was it? I had an adolescent client whose friend had just been murdered while the client was in residential treatment. The client was neither sad nor mad, just calmly told me he knew who did it and was going to kill them as soon as he got out. What made me question was the fact that I could completely understand his decision. This kid wasn't a bad kid, just a deeply hurt kid who was abandoned by everyone he'd ever loved. His decision was a logical reaction, and it made me question morality in a huge way. I thoroughly enjoyed working with this client, and he changed the way I view seemingly immoral actions. Therapist here. I do a lot of mental health assessments/evaluations, rather than long-term therapy. I can't get too specific, but I used to contract for CPS in my state to do evaluations with kids and later move to a different work setting. Well, one day a year or two later, a woman came in for an evaluation and told me a pretty normal trying to get my life back in order story, but one thing stuck out, that she had caused the death of her child. As we're talking, I realized that I knew who that kid was because of my previous job and had worked with them a few times. I'm glad I didn't make the connection until late in the evaluation, because it definitely threw a wrench me emotionally. I ended up referring the woman out to a different provider afterwards. I got out of the therapy game a decade ago, but I used to work with abuse/neglected children and their families. I had a father of a sexually abused little girl that was contemplating doing something serious to the offender. I talked him down and let him come to his own realizations about the consequences of those actions. However, it made me think, what would I do in his situation? Could I control myself? Also, hearing how many of the mom's live-in boyfriends would abuse the children was pushing me towards taking one of them out behind the shed. Hearing those kids' stories was beginning to affect me after I had my own kids just too much. So I changed careers. Still helping people, just in a different way. So hard to answer this without specifics. I'm a therapist, but was helping my former job with a therapeutic mentor spot because a person left. I did 4 hours a week with this adolescent girl who was adopted, but had a lot of mental health issues and past trauma. Parents were crap parents who let her down a lot with false promises, substance abuse and suspected sexual abuse. We had many great talks, did activities together, and had a good time. I ended up getting a call she was admitted for attempting suicide and they asked me to come sit with her until her adoptive parents arrived. I did and it was fine. She smiled quite a bit, and we did some games and distractions to help her cope. I offered to come spend time with her inpatient a week later, and it was like she was a completely different person. She had scratched her arms, neck and face so bad trying to hurt herself she had marks everywhere, ripped out clumps of hair, stared at me very intently with a sinister grin on her face. It was not the girl I had mentored for 6 months, but rather an over-medicated shell of a human. She ended up being rejected by her adoptive family and sent off to a group home. Never saw her again. I studied to become a clinical psychologist, but switched to a different specialization after a student internship I did. So I guess this counts. I can't disclose the specific details for ethical reasons, but in general, it was never the abused or the traumatized that bothered me. I'm genuinely empathetic to those sorts of people and their situations are beyond heartbreaking, but I was able enough to handle them. The patients that were too much for me were those who were so detached from reality that there was little reasoning to do with them. Each of those sessions were extremely stressful and mentally taxing. I only ever got to participate in about 24 of them, but that was enough to know I definitely didn't have the fortitude to deal with those sorts of people as a career. My borderline narcissistic dad has refused to ever go to therapy, and I suspect it's because they can identify his personality disorders immediately. His charms and manipulations don't work on them, and he hates that. When my mom was still married to him, they went to couples counseling, and for the entire session, my dad just argued with the counselor and blamed everyone else. In his eyes, he was the perfect heaven-sent husband who could do no wrong. In reality, he was an unemployed, verbally abusive alcoholic who threw the family into bankruptcy with his frivolous spending. The counselor pulled my mom aside afterwards and said, "You need to leave him. He's a sociopath." My mom fortunately listened to the therapist and divorced him. People like that can't be helped. My dad is unfortunately still very delusional, and it makes me sad that he will never be capable of empathy or self-reflection. I've just transitioned to working with older clients. The number of men I meet who just give up because there's nothing left in their lives after their spouses die, or who become unwell and feel like they are a burden, or who just don't see the point of living once they can't work anymore is ridiculous. It's what pushed me to try and get involved with men's rights, despite how much of a minefield it is. We have to stop treating men the way we do, because the long-term effects of being treated like an economic vending machine and a socio-cultural punching bag is appalling. These men have a deep-seated belief that, if they aren't sacrificing themselves for everyone around them, they literally don't deserve to be alive. It's some real grim shit. Unfortunately, now that my parents are getting older, I'm seeing this happen a lot with their peers. Typically, the husband dies first. Women live a bit longer and tend to be younger than their husbands, so this makes sense. When the husband dies, the wife is typically sad, but she expected it. She probably has a circle of friends, or she joins a growing social group of widows. If the wife dies first, the husband is often in shambles. He probably expected to go first. Now he's alone, and there aren't a lot of widows his age. In a lot of couples my parents' age, the wife was in charge of the social sphere in their house, so he probably hasn't made a new friend in years, and he's used to his wife arranging the meetups. I think breaking down the traditional division of labor in the home helps a lot. When the husband is the breadwinner and the wife handles all the home and kid stuff, she winds up in charge of the socialization. Plus a lot of my mom's friends are fellow moms that she met while raising us. Also, and I don't really know how we do this at a cultural level, but it should be more acceptable for men to talk about their emotions, especially with other men. This leads to deeper friendships and a easier time building them. The more I look at my parents' generation, the more I realize that most of the guys have few/no deep bonds outside their wives. Speaking as a straight, married woman whose husband has internalized the need to financially provide as one of the most important things in life, I wish, and this is something I've said to him, that he could remember that his time and attention, the care and nurturing he provides, is even more important to me. We were both poor when we met, and now we are doing pretty well, and it seems he regularly needs reminding that I love him for him and not the money he can earn. Also, if more men saw the value of participating in domestic/unpaid labor, it would likely support the careers of the women in their lives, which would help to balance the economic load. My dad had to stop working in his late 50s because of illness, and thankfully my mom already had a decent paying job. It's important to me that I be able to develop my career further to make more money. My husband currently makes a lot more than me, so that should he want to take a break, go back to school, or should he ever get sick or injured, he won't have to worry that we'll be destitute or something. As a society we need more compassion and more supports for families of all stages and types, and we need to stop teaching our sons that they are expected to always be strong, and that their worth is tied up in money. Men and boys are allowed to have as many feelings as girls and women are, and just as we've encouraged girls and women to be strong and brave and tough, men and boys need to be encouraged to be vulnerable, to be kind and nurturing too. This is pretty early on in my career, when I was working with a clinic. I had a patient who was a bit younger, around 19 to 20. I won't go into details about her situation, but she would occasionally experience symptoms of depression and anxiety. We had a great rapport going, and she always seemed happy to see me, and would joke around with me. We probably worked together for about a few months, and everything was going quite well. She was able to manage her moods, and could deal with anxiety better, and was functioning quite well. One day, she said that she needed to take a couple months off for a move. She scheduled her follow-up appointment, and I knew she had our emergency number and whatnot, so I wasn't too worried. When she missed our follow-up appointment, I was a bit curious. It wasn't the first time, and sent her an email to check in. Her parents responded that she had passed away, and while they didn't go into great detail, it sounded like she was a victim of suicide. It would be my first real experience of anything like that, and I was absolutely devastated. She was on my mind for a long time. I went over my notes. I would retrace every conversation, trying to figure out if I had missed something. I was also in counseling during this time. It was a part of our work for new therapists, and my counselor helped me a lot with integration, but I very much questioned if I was cut out for the work during that period of time.